welcome to all of our friends out there in the Boss Hole Transformation Nation. This is your co-host, John Brewer, which means, yes, indeed, I'm being joined by none other than Sarah Best, my friend and business partner. Sarah, how are you doing? And what the heck is going on today? Who are we talking to?
Hey, John. I am so good. Always real good. It's always a delight, to spend time with you. And I'm sure our listeners get sick of hearing how great our episode is going to be. But this one is a fun one. It's one for the books, I think. Our guest today, John, is Jeff Harry. And let me just tell you, last April when I attended the Work Human Live conference in Austin, Texas, Brene Brown was the keynote speaker, by the way. I attended that and I got to hear Jeff's breakout session, which was, the lessons we can learn about leadership and psychological safety from the Barbie movie. So I'm like, the session description very
It drew you in.
It drew me in.
Yeah.
And so I went to hear Jeff speak to a packed room, and he was so fun and engaging and on point and just witty and had such a great delivery. And based on what he talked about, I knew he would be a really powerful guest for the Boss Hole Chronicles because he works to prevent that. He is a boss hole prevention expert for sure. Let me just tell you real quickly a little bit about Jeff. And he'll tell a little bit about his own story in our episode. Okay. But he created rediscoveryourplay.com. And he is a keynote speaker. He's an author. He's a coach and facilitator. He talks on some very important things, such as working with our inner critic, dealing with a-holes is one of his great topics. He does talk about psychological safety and other things that definitely make it challenging in the workplace. And by the way, Rediscover Your Play, his main focus is how to create well-being and psychological safety and other important outcomes with play at work. But how he gets to that, I think, is worth a listen.
Once again, Sarah, you're bringing in some amazing subject matter experts. I say we just jump in. What do you say?
Let's play.
The Boss Hole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode.
Well, Jeff Harry, welcome to the Boss Hole Chronicles. This is so great to have you.
I'm so excited for this. I love the title of this book.
Well, when I first heard you speak and got to meet you, I knew you would be perfect for an episode here on the Boss Hole Chronicles. Without, spoiling anything, let's have you share, how did you end up doing what you're doing today and focusing on what you focus on?
Yeah. So the Batman origin story is, did you ever see the movie Big with Tom Hanks?
Oh yeah.
Back in the day. Yeah. So I saw that in third grade and I was like, you can play with toys for a living? And I was like, oh my goodness, I need to play with toys. So I started writing toy companies. First, I went to F.E.O. Schwartz, dance on the piano. No one discovered me like in the movies. So they just lie. They lie about that. And then I just started writing toy companies and I wrote them for the next 15 years until I got into the toy industry. And I don't know if you've ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted, right? And then been so disappointed when you got there. Yeah. But, there were, I arrived in the toy industry, no toys, no high fives, no joy, no kids, no play. Mm-hmm. And I was so many boss holes, everywhere. So I left my dream industry, my dream job, and I came to the San Francisco Bay Area and I bumped into a job on Craigslist. And if you know anything about Craigslist, that's where you get furniture in a dark alleyway. So I don't think you should get a job from it, but I found a job teaching kids engineering with Lego. Hence the bow tie that I'm wearing today. They were just teaching kids engineering with Lego. There was 7 people. We had no idea what we were doing, but we started to grow it and we took it from 7 people to 400 people.
Wow.
And it became the largest Lego inspired STEM organization in the US. We partnered with Lego. We worked with Facebook, Google, Adobe, all the top companies. We built gigantic stuff out of Lego. I helped 3 staff get into Lego Masters. We did just a lot of really cool stuff. We broke some world records with Lego. And then at one point I left, worked on the Obama campaign, and then I came back and I didn't want to work with kids anymore. I wanted to work at the organization. And I was just like, I just want to start doing stuff with adults. So we started running team building events for all the top tech companies in Silicon Valley because that's where I was residing. And I realized while I was there, two things. One, not as healthy of a workplace as you would think all these top companies are.
Right.
And two, a lot of boss holes, so many boss holes. So ironically enough, the first workshop that I created with my company, Rediscover Your Play, I partnered with a friend of mine, Gary Ware, another really amazing speaker and improv guy out of San Diego. And we made a workshop called Dealing with A-Holes in the Workplace through play. That was our first workshop. And it got picked up by Inbound. So we got to speak at Inbound in front of hundreds of people. And then we went to Australia. And that was February of 2020. And then everything got locked down. And then after that, I just started making up talks that just challenged the system, that challenged the antiquated system that we currently have. And I've been doing that ever since.
That's fascinating. That. Yeah. Well, so I've heard you as a keynote. You're ridiculously funny and very poignant in the points you make. The talk that I got to listen to, and this was at Work Human Live last April, is what the Barbie movie can teach you about psychological safety and leadership. Of course, I was intrigued and I knew I was going to attend that talk. So I made sure to watch the Barbie movie on the way down to Austin where the conference was. But yeah, you have this unique way of making the important things in work and what we'll call boss hole prevention, making it palatable by creating fun and levity around it. But there's always a ping of truth in there for sure. So when you think about what's happening in the industry, you're speaking all over the country, you're going to SHRM conferences and you're speaking to executives. What are the things that you're addressing? What are the chief things that are troublesome that you're seeing out there?
So work sucks, right? Like that's the vibe that a lot of employees, when I talk to employees, what's going on, right? And it's not like it just sucks like it usually sucks, but like it sucks much more ever since 2020. Yeah. And you would have thought like with so many people dying that we would come back and we've been like looking out for another and like caring about each other. But instead it like lifted the veil on how exploitive a lot of companies are of their staff. So when I talk to employees, the main three things that I would hear a lot is like employees feel disrespected, right? Employees feel exploited and employees feel used. And I mentioned this during the Barbie talk. Disrespected, great example is like, you know, there's a story of someone that worked at Google for 15 years and he went into work at 4 a.m. in the morning using his fob key and it didn't work. And that's how he found out he got laid off, right? And 1,000 other people at that happened the same way. And that wasn't just Google. Like many tech companies are now doing that. Why? How is that okay, right? Especially people that have devoted so much of their life. They're devoting 2,000 to 2,500 hours a year. Another company passed out, I think I told you about this, the stale cookies. They reached $10 billion in sales. And instead of rewarding their staff with bonuses and raises, they instead passed out these cookies that they sent out late and they became stale and they had 10B on them. So they were like, congratulations, we got this much money, but you don't get any of it, right? Yeah. So like there's just so many stories of just like staff just feeling taken advantage of. And it's really bad. And that's why like union representation is coming back. That's why people are fighting back much more because people are angry that you would have thought that, great example with HR, right? That we would get more support because in many ways we saved our companies. Like it wasn't marketing that figured out what we should do from an epidemiology perspective. It was HR that figured all this stuff out. Were they rewarded with that? No, most of them, when I'm at conferences and I'm like, how many of you doing 2 to 3 jobs? 80% of the people raise their hands. Yeah. So where's the support? Where's the money? Where's all this stuff that we spoke of, right? Where's the empathy, compassion, and humanity? That's what's currently missing. That's currently missing.
And we want to dive into that empathy, compassion, and humanity, why it's lost. But I want to go back to something really quick, because at the advent of the pandemic, Sarah, you and I were involved in working with a number of leadership teams virtually just to talk about resilience, understanding your behavioral wiring, your leadership DNA. And I'll tell you what, if COVID did anything, it did a lot of things. If it did anything, it really exposed how poorly we sort of vetted out people we were putting in management and leadership roles. And it seems to have been exacerbated, or there's I don't know if it's resentment, but this incivility that continues to sort of flourish. Organizations, it's not a fair equation from the standpoint of, we're this company, we want you to feel like you're part of this community until we don't need you, and then your fob doesn't work. That's not an even exchange. And the emerging workforce, they are expecting that connection and that exchange. And this is where we're not seeing that empathy, compassion, and humanity. But I wanted to go back to that simply because that was such a tipping point. And one other thing related to that, I'd love to hear about your concept or your perspective on the return to work push that some organizations are saying, well, we think it's time that everybody comes back and we're going to mandate that. It's like, you got to be kidding me. Are you that tone deaf to what's going on? So thanks for letting me jump in there. I just wanted to reflect on that.
Just to add on to that, right? Yeah. So a study that just came out in 2024, I think Fortune and Forbes both featured it, about how nearly all bosses are trained to be doing the management job. They have no training whatsoever. So when we talk about nearly all bosses, we're talking about 82% of bosses, and it's leading to 1 in 3 people quitting. Right?
There you go.
So in addition to 85% of the workforce is disengaged, in addition to 81% are looking for other jobs, in addition to 60 or 70% of them don't have a work-life balance.
Right.
And disengagement numbers are to the point that, like, I think businesses are losing 450 to 550 billion a year in disengagement, just because people are turnover, absenteeism, people calling in sick, like all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So all of this is going on. In many ways, I feel like work is like just so broken. And so you have people in leadership positions that should not be in positions of power.
Right.
And then when you ask them, what do they hate most? They hate training, because all the micromanagers hate it. No wonder the micromanagers want people back in the office. They have nothing to do. They have no one to point stuff to. During the pandemic, it showed you're not actually necessary. There's a book that came out with, I think it was called BS Jobs or Bullshit Jobs a while back, 4 or 5 years ago. And it proved 45-50% of jobs probably unnecessary. A lot of middle management jobs. A lot of ones where you're just passing paper from one to another person. So of course micromanagers want people back in the office because they need control, because they're not good at their job. And I think this all ties in with, are y'all familiar with the Pornelli's iron law of bureaucracy?
I can't say that I am.
I think so.
So I just came across this myself. So based on Pornelli's iron law of bureaucracy, it talks about how people that support the bureaucracy at the detriment of the organization are rewarded. Meanwhile, anyone that wants to change or improve the organization usually is ostracized or removed. This is what we're fighting. We're fighting this iron law of bureaucracy, of mediocrity, of mediocre leaders that want to keep it together because they don't want to become obsolete. If they have to get better, they're not going to be there. So that's why they keep it as bad as it is.
I was reviewing the Gallup's recent State of the Global Workforce report that just came out. I think it was yesterday, actually. And it wasn't surprising to learn that managers are the pivotal piece. And as you talked about, Jeff, they're most in need of upskilling and the right style of approach to optimize their team members, but they're perhaps not open to it in some cases, or it's not available to them. And they're selected for the reasons you indicated, which is hard. John, what were you going to say?
Yeah, something as simple as I'm an engineer. I want to raise, and the only job up there is a managerial job. I know a lot of engineers that would rather be engineers.
Amen.
They don't want, but they feel they have to because it's the only way they can move up. There's no other position when, if you think of individual contributors that could mentor in a different way, if we were more creative, we would have more individual contributor jobs available. So instead, you're forcing people, or you're just being like, you breathe, you move up. You're just throwing people up there. Why? Because you did the last job well, does it mean that now you can teach others how to do the other job well? It makes no sense.
I was just working with a group of business leaders, and we were talking about some of the trends, culture, development, and so forth. And you can tell that a number of these are more established, perhaps come from the more command and control way of doing business versus trust and autonomy. We use the metaphor of it's the difference between the old stoplight intersection and a roundabout. People freak out at a roundabout, but this is the new way of work. It's the new way. It's the way to reinvent the workplace. But the thing is, one gentleman talked about how important it is for managers and supervisors to be equipped. And I asked, how much do you invest in each one of your managers to do that? I mean, what's your line item in your budget? And he said, we don't have one. We just kind of make it up. And I said, you're really not developing people. I mean, if you are not saying we're going to put a line item in our budget and we're going to invest in our supervisors and our managers to make them better people developers, if you're not doing that, you're not a learning organization and you're not serious about developing non-boss holes.
Exactly. None of your actions express your priorities.
Right.
And think about it. What's the first thing that gets cut when we're not hitting our quarterly numbers? Professional development.
Yep.
So anything that is like feel good, you're like, oh, we actually don't need that. You actually need that more now when your quarterly results are not hitting. But it's amazing how we run to the things that are more easily measurable than the stuff that actually really matters, right?
Sure. Yeah. Lencioni would say that's the smart stuff versus the healthy stuff, like the stuff we need to have in place to allow people to thrive. I think the other thing we got to focus on, if we're a smaller to mid-sized company, maybe not the big giants, some of which you've worked in and worked very closely with, they're family owned or they're just very old school. There hasn't been any development in their operational model. And what we often encounter is that behavioral challenges, performance issues just don't get addressed. And that breeds a whole other world of problems. But in many cases, we're sensing a little patriarchy. There's like, this is how it works. Yep. You and I have talked about this. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was literally just talking to someone that just works with family-owned companies, right? How to transition them out, right? Or how to sell them or whatever. Because most of the time, the sons and daughters don't want the company, right?
Right.
But they're being forced to and then also there's so much nepotism.
Yeah.
So you have someone that's in charge of marketing and he doesn't care or he's not even really interested in it, but they want someone in a position of, rather than putting someone that's qualified that actually would be really amazing, they put one of their kids or one of their cousins in, and then they think it can operate that way, right? And I say this all the time, work culture is defined by the worst behavior tolerated. So if you have your son that is just messing around and maybe does 4 hours of work a month, and the rest of the time he's just, using your expense account, you're sending a message to everybody else.
Oh yeah.
This is what we tolerate. This is what we actually support. So I don't care what their mission is. I don't care what your values are. I care about your worst behavior you tolerate. Address that. That addresses your boss hole problem.
Yep.
Directly.
It's true. Whether it's a family member or just an ill-suited person for a particular role, when things like that go unaddressed, it really does suck the psychological safety and trust out of the company, because it doesn't matter what I do. I'm working hard over here. I'm committed. I bring my whole self to the job and I love this opportunity to grow. But look at what I see happening that doesn't get addressed. So it's unfair and it's unkind. This might be a time to sort of pivot. I mean, we could talk all day about the problems and the challenges, but you make it your mission to talk about what can help inside the workplace, in the culture, reducing boss hole behavior. So give us some of those tips and tools.
Yeah. So there's two approaches to it. I think I'll put the psychological safety part later.
Okay.
Let's talk boss hole part, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have to set boundaries. So when I'm running my workshop on dealing with toxicity in the workplace through play, I am all about organizing to challenge that toxic person. So it might start off with simply reframing and redirecting, right? Meaning that boss hole is not in meetings, because when they are, they affect the meeting. And we've talked about how your boss has more of a psychological effect on you than your spouse, than your therapist, than your doctor. So these people are actually making you sick, on top of the fact that you might be more stupid because you're around someone that's toxic, and you might be more mean. There's all these studies that communicate that. So the reframing and redirecting, right? So can we not have them in the meeting, or being hey, and sorry if there's a Chad listening to this, but I'm just going to say Chad. Hey, Chad, let me save you a meeting. You don't need to come to this meeting. It's not a good use of your time.
Yeah.
I'll summarize it and then share it with you afterwards, right? So I'm giving from easiest to implement, not as impactful, to hardest to implement.
Good.
Then the second one is actually challenging them directly. Challenge that toxic person directly. So either at the meeting when they cut you off, because they will, or they cut off your colleagues, and they're speaking 80% of the time, you jump back in and you watch out for each other. So you're like, oh, I'm sorry, Chad. I know you have something really important to say, but Samantha is like the lead on this project. So I think we need to hear from her. And you do that over and over again for the next 3 months. You even talk to the facilitator to manage it and set the ground rules so Chad can't run amok during the meeting. Because right now people are just giving up and being like, let Chad speak. We don't care. Because that's what toxic people want. They want you to just give up. That's their strategy. They're just going to tire you out until you just are like, you can do whatever you want because I'm just done here, right?
Yeah.
And I even say that to people. I'm like, before we even figure out these boundaries, you have to decide whether this is even healthy for you to fight. Do you want this fight?
Yeah.
Or does it make more sense for you to start looking for another job, right? Or or you want to stay in the company, just start looking for another department because this is not a healthy situation. So you got to first decide whether it's worth it, right? But then you reframe, redirect, and then challenge. And then the third is so you confront them as well. You confront them after a meeting and you go, what do you want to get out of this meeting, Chad? Do you want to talk most of the time or do you want other ideas? If you want other ideas, when you do this, when you say Samantha's stupid or Jeff is stupid in the meeting, we're not going to share. Like the impact is that we're out. So you say that to him, so you set the boundary. Now he might just be like, whatever, I'll do whatever I want. That's when you're going to their boss and being like, does this person fit the values of the organization? Does they fit the mission? And more importantly, because they won't care about that, is this person costing us money?
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Line, we're trying to make money. Oh, Chad brings in $1 million a year. Well, let me show you the documentation of the last 7 people that have quit because of Chad. If you look at the exit interviews, all these people reference this person. How much did that add up to? Oh, $1.5 million. So actually, it's costing us $500,000 to keep this guy.
Yeah.
Is that something we're cool with? So you challenge their motivators. You figure out the decision makers' priorities, and you're like, does this fit the values, the mission of the organization, if that's important to you? And does this fit our financial goals? Because clearly it doesn't, right?
Right.
So then that's that. If the manager's manager is also a boss hole, then you have to go to other departments or to the C-suite executives, and you have to really determine whether or not they believe in their mission and values or not. And it's great because if you find out that they love Chad and his friend from the same fraternity, then you know you need to go, right?
That's right.
And if they don't, then you're like, do you know this is what's going on in your organization? Do you know in this department, this is how your company is represented? Are you cool with that? Right? And I say it all the time. Any building or any room that has all the leadership posters on there, like leadership with the eagle, and the more posters you have, the more toxic the place is. Like, because if you need to tell people to have integrity with a poster, then you're already done, right? And then finally, the last part is you have to address the inner boss hole in yourself.
There
So
you
the
go.
inner critic, because somehow you have to identify, why does this person trigger you? Because if you don't address that, and you don't address every time they call me stupid, or every time they say you shouldn't get promoted, if I believe that stuff, then I will act a certain way. And even if I leave this organization, the next organization I'm going to be with, it's going to be the same issues.
That's
because
right.
I haven't addressed my inner boss hole, my inner critic. Once you do that, and then you really are like, wait a minute, I should get paid more than Chad. I should be actually his boss. The next time he disrespects you, you can be like, Chad, don't ever speak to me that way. And that empowers everybody else to be like, oh, look, Jeff just stood up to Chad. Maybe I can stand up to Chad, right? And then each and every one of us is standing up to this person. And then they can't act that way anymore because it's not a fun place for them to work because they can't bully people. And that's when they consider leaving. So that's my approach from a boundary standpoint.
So if you want to know what happens to Chad, you better tune in next week for part 2 of our discussion with Jeff Harry. What a great way to kick off this 2-part episode. Make sure you check out all of the links in the show notes to learn more about Jeff and this really cool work that he does. We'll see you next week.